Hello, everybody. Welcome back to This Weird House. I am Nick Boddick. Real quick, something I have forgotten to do on every previous episode is please leave a review and rate this wherever you're listening to it. But keep in mind, I'm a very fragile human being, so when you leave your review, make sure it is positive. But to move on to what people actually care about, I have an incredible guest today, and I actually mean incredible. He's one of the most celebrated authors of all time, Mr. Ramsey Campbell. How are you, sir?
Hey, I'm okay. I mean, unlike you, I'm not human, but that's a minor matter.
I think you've made that clear through your words. Yes. So yeah, I really just well, firstly, I really appreciate you coming on. It is truly an honor. I know I've
Hey,
spoken to you before, but it's just every time I get to, it's awesome.
oh, my pleasure. My pleasure. You bet.
Um, so I just kind of just want to talk to you on this podcast. I started because I like the way I've put it is I like talking to people about the things I like talking to the people who make the things I like about the things I like, and you make things I like very much. So I
Well,
just kind of want to talk to you about the genre just in general.
okay, okay.
What got you interested in writing horror?
Oh, so you want the 90-minute answer, do you, presumably, to that one?
By all means.
No, I'll try and truncate it as best I may. Lordy, I've loved the field ever since I can recall, and it's a question of when did I really, become aware of it. I mean, in terms of reading adult fiction, I was 6 years old, and my mother was then letting me use her adult ticket at the local public library to take books out. And I'm not absolutely certain which the very first book was, but I think it was either Great Short Stories of the World or it was 50 Years of Ghost Stories, which is an anthology of, some of the greats. But if it was Great Short Stories of the World, well, that included The Telltale Heart. And at 6 years old, that's pretty strong meat, and I found it deeply disturbing and rather felt I better not let my mother see I'm reading this, otherwise, it'll be spirited away immediately. So I didn't. Although, strangely enough, I know not strictly horror, but there was a story in that book that haunted me at least as much as the Poe, called A Dark Brown Dog. Did you know it at all? Does that ring a bell?
I'm not familiar with that one.
Okay. Well, I mean, it's very much a sort of slice of seedy life. It's set in a tenement block, and basically, it's this family living on an upper floor. The father, as I recall, is a drunkard, and there's a little toddler who befriends this dog. And basically, one day, the father comes, staggers home, having drunk an enormous amount, and as a joke, as I remember this, chucks the dog out the window or off the balcony. Now, we're a lot of stories up. And we then have this anguished description of this kid having to climb down all the stairs, one step at a time, having to, use all his limbs to get down. And then they just found him just cradling this dead dog. The end. And, that really, shook me
It's
up.
horrifying.
Well, I know, it's, as I say, not particularly a horror story, but clearly, you could see my point.
For
And
sure.
for decades, I was convinced this was an Arthur Morrison story, and that it was in his collection, Tales of Mean Streets, because it sounds as if it should be. Actually, no, it's Stephen Crane, famed for The Red Badge of Courage, filmed by John Huston. And, it's just this sort of 4-page short story. And I eventually discovered the book again and reread it. And it's just as powerful. However, if indeed, it was 50 Years of Ghost Stories that got me going, well, that certainly is where my love of being terrified by the uncanny tale started, really. And I mean, again, I was 6 years old. There were stories in that. Actually, my mother said, "Look, you mustn't read The Turn of the Screw. That's not quite nice." So at the time I didn't read that, though I did read. And I have to confess, I was hideously, monstrously precocious. So, Wilbur Whately and the Dunwich Horror had nothing on me. And so I was reading Edith Wharton, I'm reading here when I was 6 years old. Story in there called Afterward, which is a ghost story. And believe me, I got it. I got exactly what was going on. I was duly terrified. But there was one story in particular, and I couldn't remember the title for years. I just remembered 2 images from it, in one of which somebody's opening a chest of drawers searching for something. And at the bottom drawer, there's just sort of, heaps of linen. And then a little pink hand comes groping out toward them. And then the other, somebody else, I think, another unlucky character in the same tale, goes into a room in the dark and feels there's some presence in there, and then finds what he describes as sort of gigantic insect feelers groping over his face. Now, you can well imagine a 6-year-old having a number of uneasy nights after that. And it was only, well, I don't know how much longer, I think it probably was only when I got A Collected Stories Of that I realized it was by M.R. James. So that was my first encounter with M.R. James, that great genius of supernatural dread. And really, this is really, I suppose, where my love of the field began. And from that point onward, anything in the library that was of that kind, or science fiction, because not that many supernatural horror anthologies in the library in those days. They were a bit of a premium. There was a lot more science fiction, August Derleth anthologies, Groff Conklin, Bleeler and Dicty, all these guys that I was reading. Frederick Pohl. So, I got a real baptism of fire in science fiction as well as supernatural horror. And, these are areas I've loved ever since.
That's awesome. Man, that dog story just sounds so bleak and depressing.
Yeah, well, yeah.
The story of insect feelers coming out of the dark, that is exactly the kind of story that would have just ruined my life at 6 years old. That was terrified.
Mind you, eight years old, you see, I read The Colour Out of Space, Lovecraft in a Groff Conklin anthology, and I'd already read a fair number of tales in the field by now. Obviously, 2 years later after that first encounter, but I genuinely felt there was this is almost forbidden. This is almost going too far. I wasn't going to have this feeling. If my mother sees what I'm reading, that's it. So I've got to conceal it.
Feels like you're doing something wrong.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Because it was just that much almost too visceral. Again, despite that, it's a very indirectly narrated story, much of it. Again, I got exactly what was going on in it, and it was all the more powerful for the reticence, as I think much of the greatest horror fiction is.
Oh yeah, definitely. That actually brings me into my next question. A lot of your fiction, it's very Lovecraftian. I'm just kind of curious, what was it about Lovecraft's work or Lovecraft's style of writing, the kind of horror that he wrote and is now named after him? What did you connect with there that so much of your work is in that subgenre?
Oh, well, the sense of the cosmic, the aspiration towards awesomeness, if you like. Because I have to explain this, you see. I say I read The Colour Out of Space. I read a few more minor stories in anthologies. But by 1960, in Britain, there had never been a single paperback of Lovecraft. None. And only one hardcover collection, in fact, back in the early 50s, which I never saw. Now, comes 1960, and I find it's a sort of, not even a bookshop window, it's a sort of combined grocery store and bookshop, a suburban place in Liverpool. I found a copy of Cry Horror, which actually Don Walheim, who later set up Door Books, he edited this, I think, back in the late 40s for Avon, as I remember it. And this was a reissue with a wonderful cover by Richard Powers, this sort of ghastly, rotting, almost inhuman shape, which I assume is the Outsider, actually, Lovecraft's Outsider. It looks that way. Anyway, this was a complete collection of Lovecraft, including The Colour Out of Space, which I hadn't read for, must have been 8 years, actually, 8 years since I'd read it. And, £half, which, was a lot of money in those days, believe me. So, I was sort of grubbing about in my pocket and convinced that if I went away and got the money, it'd be gone and I'd never see it again. And, the last farthing I found in my pocket just made up the £half. So I was able to plonk all this brass on the counter and buy the book. And then skived off school the next day, read the entire thing from cover to cover, and was just utterly immersed in Lovecraft. Not just the cosmic vision, but, the style and the way that everything in the story, very much in the Poe-esque mould, is geared toward the effect of that story, which, of course, Lovecraft's great contention. That's how supernatural horror should be organised. But it was the style, it was the modulation of the prose, it was the kind of gathering of detail, all that stuff. But above all, it was that in the best stories that largeness of vision that really did it for me. And, I'd already been writing stories for years, and very terrible they were, believe me. But now I knew I wanted to do this. I wanted to, do stuff like Lovecraft. And so I began to write fan fiction, using Lovecraft's mythos. But even then, I was trying to build on it and not just recycle. So, I didn't want to write another, Cthulhu story. So I, picked up little references. So Bob Bloch had just a passing reference in one story to Beatis, this entity that he invented, but he never said anything about it. Serpent bearded it was. That's the only thing he ever says. So I thought, well, okay, let's do a story about him, and I managed to incorporate some existing legends, and that was really my start in as you say, the Lovecraftian.
So, yeah, I actually only just this like 2 days ago, I think, I read a story called The Beard of Beatis. So it's weird that you bring that up because it's a very
yes,
not a widely known entity whatsoever.
He's not in the great pantheon, no, I grant you, but he's a second stringer though. He's still pretty
for sure.
Good. Oh, he's still pretty monstrous, give him his monstrousness at least.
Oh, definitely.
I know we do. I know we do. Yeah.
Oh yeah. So, let me see. Oh, okay. Here we go. Speaking of Lovecraft's entities, which Lovecraftian entity is your favorite? Are you a Cthulhu guy? Are you a Azathoth guy?
Oh no, Yog Sothoth. Come on, let's hear it for Yog Sothoth. Is the most mystical and the most mysterious, sure. And we never really see him. I mean, we do get a bit of a description, which is a very curious and kind of alien geometrical kind of a description as I remember it. But he I think sort of sums up the kind of, again, the aspiration toward something larger than the narrative can describe. So the narrative has to be a kind of metaphor for it instead.
Yeah, definitely. That's Yog-Sothoth. I love that it is the everything of the universe, and how I like the way you put it with not being able to fit in the narrative, because you can't really describe that.
That's
in
right.
A way that gives it form. I like that. That's a good way of putting that. So speaking of, you mentioned Liverpool before, and as I understand it, I'll just get into it. How did the whole Brychester, Severn Valley all come to form? Did that? Please go ahead.
Sure. No, well, that was it. You see, okay, I wrote these several fan stories, basically, and then a friend of mine, Patrick J. Kearney, who is now a great historian of erotica, but he was then publishing a fanzine back in the early 60s from London. He was a great Lovecraft fan too, and he suggested I should send the stories to August Derleth, just for Derleth's opinion, not to try and sell them to him, but just to get the opinion of who was the guy who was then really the expert on Lovecraft. So I duly wrote Derleth a letter saying, dear Mr. Derleth, would you like to give me your opinion on these things? Well, I'm sure you had hundreds of such letters, far too many from people you've never heard of. But he wrote back saying, well, look, we have to look at these because we own the copyright on the Lovecraft mythos. Well, that's obviously arguable, but okay, that's what he said, and that's fair enough. So, you've got to let me see these stories before you attempt publication. Well, I wasn't actually thinking, except for fanzine publication, I've not really thought of anything, any publication at all. So typed up the story, sent them to Derleth. After a while, I got this letter back from him saying, these stories need a lot of work, which by gum they did, that's for sure. And you show too much and don't tell, and you need to get the characters speaking to each other, which is odd because in my early, bad sort of juvenile stuff, I'd certainly had characters talking, but because I'd read Lovecraft, I thought, oh well, there's no dialogue, so that must be the way to do it. You don't have any dialogue, which is a bit of a slavish attitude. Anyway, it does quite rightly say, okay, get the characters talking, and also one the thing to answer your question, he said. Basically, you need to relocate the stories to somewhere. Don't use Lovecraft's, Arkham settings, but find somewhere of your own in England. They'll have, some sort of individuality of their own. But, and Dilla said this to me, I'm now 14 years old, remember? Actually, no, I beg your pardon, no, 15. And he said, as I say, it needs a lot of work, but if you're prepared to do all this stuff, and also if you could write other stories in similar vein, we do think this may be an Arkham House book to publish. Well, 15 years old, that's pretty fighting talk, So
Yeah.
when two things, one when I thought, how dare you tell me what to do with my stories, and then when I thought, my God, he's actually offering to publish them, and picked myself up the floor, and then got on with doing the editorial stuff, and duly did, and invented the Britchester area down the Severn Valley. I mean, you have to say the Severn Valley was August's suggestion. Because the sort of Roman background, possible Roman survivals, which I could tie and did, and there were places around there that actually could be legends that I was able to incorporate. So I had some fun doing that, and so that is how Britchester came into being. But from being a sort of imitation, a sort of, if you like, a twin area to Arkham Country. Britchester then in particular starts turning into a big urban metropolis, and a lot more varied and certainly a lot seedier in some areas than Lovecraft's usually were. And so it took on a life of its own. And really it was Liverpool in all but name. And so eventually I thought, well, why call it Britchester? Actually use Liverpool. And that's what I started doing.
Okay. All right. That's awesome. And then within that Severn Valley mythos, as I've seen it called,
yeah. Well, I mean, I say it's Britchester mythos. In fact,
I'm sorry. Yeah.
Well, no, you're okay. I've taken to calling it that now. Yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
The Britchester mythos. So the entities of your creation that I'm most familiar with are Glocky and Dowloth.
Yes.
So for Glocky, how did the concept? My absolute favorite stories of yours are The Inhabitant of the Lake and The Revelations of Glocky.
Thank you.
I love that whole saga that goes on between those stories there. I would love to know about like the creation of that whole storyline and the creation of Glocky and just that whole valley along the lake there.
Now, do you know what my answer's going to be? I've no idea. I can't remember. I don't know. I mean,
Fair enough.
It just gradually came to me. I wanted to do, an entity, something. I mean, Lord knows, not by any means as impressive as any of Lovecraft's, but my own little contribution. And I suppose I just tried to come up with something original, in terms of his shape and what he does to some extent. But then, I have to say, I think probably, you're thinking of The Last Revelation, are you? The novella the later one. So, I went back to him, as you saw, and tried to do more with him. And I think, tried to inject more of the cosmic into the story and had, some fun doing it, I hope. Deoloth, as we call him now, he recurs in the trilogy that I did recently. Because again, I mean, part of the reason for this was that my old friend Pete Crowther at PS Publishing, this was years ago now, but he said, why don't you do a supernatural horror trilogy? Because nobody has done this, they did. Well, it wasn't strictly true. In fact, there's I believe it's the Ghost House trilogy by Claire McNally that came out in the 80s as a paperback original in a slipcase. So there was that. And of course, by the time I actually got round to doing mine, which is, it took me some years. Well, this is the point, you see. For me, the only reason to write a trilogy is if there is a reason to write a trilogy. I don't want just to write a long novel and chop it into 3 volumes. It needs to have that form for me to want to do it at all. And eventually I thought, well, what about following the central characters throughout most of their lives? Start in their teens and then in their 40s and then, in getting on old age, in the last volume. And equally the antagonists are aging and equally the antagonist's family is growing and so is his influence. And so I thought, well, yeah, maybe there is something here. And ultimately I did do the trilogy. And I must say I'm kind of fond of that book, those books, I mean, I'd never do another trilogy, but I'm very glad I did that one. Now, I have to say this. In the interim, of course, Jeff Vandermeer, does the Southern Reach trilogy, which is very fine. But I think there's room for two, and so I don't think they've got a huge amount in common, except that sort of sense of the cosmic from very different viewpoints, very different
Yeah.
approaches. But that was my. That was Daeloth. Now I can explain that one. Go back to the beginning for him. The Render of the Veils, which was the original, Daeloth story. And this
Mhm.
was actually because I'd asked Earth, if I could do this. He'd, you may recall, written a number of stories which he called collaborations, Lovecraft and Derleth. And basically, he was taking notes Lovecraft had written for stories in his commonplace book and never got around to writing. So Derleth, fleshed out these and wrote stories around them. So I asked, could I do the same? And he said, well, okay, so long as you don't, reuse stuff that had already been done. And in a couple of cases, Lovecraft had simply transcribed the plot of a novel he had just read, not to use it himself, but just, to have it there, I think.
Yeah.
So there was a note. I mean, I'm only paraphrasing this, but it's something in the Lovecraft's note is something like that the notion that life is an illusion with some hideous reality lurking behind it. I thought, hey, well, there's a story there, and that's where Daeloth ultimately came from. And having done him in the Render of the Veils, I thought, recently, I thought, well, there is more that I could do with him, and so the trilogy was. Well, one of the reasons for it was the result of that.
Okay, that's interesting. Yeah, the imagery when you were creating Daoloth, I've been pronouncing it Daoloth all this
Ah,
time.
yeah. Well, that's lucky because you don't invoke him that way.
True,
Yeah,
true.
yeah.
Good point. Good
Yes,
point.
yes.
My
Mm-hmm.
ignorance is saving me yet
Indeed,
again.
so indeed.
But the imagery of Daoloth is I've seen fan art of it.
Mm-hmm.
I love it. It's like just different shapes all kind of mending together but not,
Mm.
and when you look at it and there's maybe eyes in there, just
Yes.
was there anything in particular that inspired that imagery, or was it just were you just trying to think of something creepy?
No, I was just trying to think of something, difficult to describe. You describe it,
Mm-hmm.
but the description has got to be sufficiently alien to convey, something you can't quite get your mind around, if you like. I mean, funny enough, I mean there was a role playing game recently. Well, oh gosh, one of the Cthulhu Mythos games, and they did this wonderful series of figurines of my various creatures. Of course, they had to do poor old. Well, I say poor old. It's not poor old Death. It was poor old sculptor, who had to do something or other to embody this idea, and he does extremely well with it, I think. But if he had known to wait, well, he wouldn't have, because I hadn't written it. But had he, waited until I wrote the trilogy, I did find a different image, a sort of avatar of old Daeloth, which is effectively a version of the worm Ouroboros, the eternal cycle and so forth. So that shows up as the icon that people have in the trilogy, and that would, I think, be easier to sculpt. But sorry
Yeah.
about that, guy. I wish I could have told you.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, there's some really cool, or really incredible stories coming out of those tabletop games, like
Mm.
the Cthulhu Mythos. I'm actually just starting now to try to get into like tabletop role playing games, and I'm going by way of the Mythos ones. And yeah, there's so many. I didn't realize how expansive that library is
Oh gosh,
there. I mean,
yes.
there's so many novels and collections and
Yeah,
anthologies from
yeah,
so many authors in the
yeah.
subgenre. It's incredible.
Yeah, yes, I know. I mean, but it's a strange. You see, this is, of course. I mean, obviously, Lovecraft would have been astounded by his, not only his success, but his global fame and that of his
Hmm.
creatures. But I mean, in my own small way, let me not presume to be comparing. But what has happened? Is that old Daloth and Glaaki, they've taken on a life of their own, and they're out there, and you've got innumerable paintings of them and drawings, and heavy metal bands are doing songs about them, and people are writing stories about them or incorporating them in stories, and it's astonishing. I mean, they're out of my control, so I've loosed them on the world, and I can only apologise and cower in a corner and hope they don't notice me.
And all we can do is thank you, because
well, there you go.
So shifting gears a little bit from the strictly Lovecraftian, strictly cosmic, are you a big horror movie guy?
Oh yes,
yeah?
For sure.
What kind of horror movies do you like?
All of them. Well, not every single one, but all kinds for sure. So from the highly supernatural to the to something like, say, Halloween, the original Halloween, which is a great movie, I think, but a very witty slasher movie. Now, I mean, a lot of the things that came after, mistake they assume it's just more gore and more evisceration. Well, that's not really what the original was about. It was very much more about dread and menace and visual wit, and actually, I've always said that if Val Lewton had been producing movies that late, that's the kind of slasher movie he might have made, because it feels to me very Lewton-esque, very suggestive and atmospheric. But equally, my all-time favourite horror movie is Night of the Demon. I mean, better known in America, I think, as Curse of the Demon. Dana Andrews, Peggy Cummins, and the wonderful...
I'm familiar with the title, yeah.
Well, listen, find it. It's out there. I mean, there's a great box set by Indicator, which I think must have been released in America as well. And it has every conceivable cut of the film, because there were two distinct edits of that film, one of which is about 8 minutes longer than the other. And the re-edited version actually rejigs the order of events as well. It isn't really shortening the movie. And both are worth seeing. But I mean, I just love that film. It's but equally, what else? I mean, the only filmmaker who frequently terrifies me, whose work frequently terrifies me, on an absolute gut level, is David Lynch. I mean,
of course,
Lost Highway, Fire Walk with Me, Mulholland Drive,
Blue Velvet.
Blue Velvet, Inland Empire. But I mean, I've sort of figured this much out, or this is how it seems to me, that that just as Hitchcock used all the elements of cinema, to convey a particular emotional experience. I mean, often, though not always, suspense. Lynch does that to convey a sense of the uncanny or the surreal, and but on that visceral level. And I mean, for instance, Lost Highway, probably my favourite, certainly in some ways. And I mean, I found the first section of the film, up to the point at which Bill Pullman is thrown into jail. I mean, almost too potent to watch. I genuinely have, whenever I put it on, I think, oh God, I'm going to do this to myself again. But I do.
Why?
Yeah, why?
For sure. Yeah.
But there are good reasons. There are very good reasons, and I'm always glad I did. Now the one we saw, I think I'm not sure if it's a Shudder production, but it's certainly on the Shudder channel. And it's a controversial movie. Some people absolutely loathe it. But Jenny, my wife, and I mean, actually, genuinely were left shaken by it. And that's a movie called Speak No Evil.
I have also heard of that.
Scandinavian. I'll say nothing about it, except it starts as a kind of comedy of embarrassment and social awkwardness and unease. But by gum, well, where it goes... The filmmakers didn't know it was going that way, but they followed it. And, well, I'm sort of glad they did, but in a way, almost wish they hadn't. But that is all I shall say about that.
All right. I'll definitely check that one out.
Okay.
So sorry, I don't mean to keep jumping around here.
No. Go on. And don't forget the Three Stooges. We've got to bring them in sometime.
But of course.
But you carry on.
So of the classic literary monsters. You got Dracula, Wolfman, Frankenstein, the
Mm-hmm.
Mummy. Were you
Mm.
were you into those when you were kind of forming
Oh,
your love
oh,
for horror?
oh, sure, sure. I mean, well, yes, certainly Frankenstein, certainly Dracula, which I read when I was 11. I think, I mean, I don't, I mean, funnily enough, Frankenstein was not that easy to find. At least if it was easy, I failed to do so, in book form. So I'd actually seen the original James Whale, Boris Karloff movie, I believe. No, I'm sorry, I've got it wrong. I saw the original Hammer movie. That's what it was. The Curse of Frankenstein. Christopher Lee, Peter Cushing. That I saw before I managed to find the book in paperback. So that was an odd way round to do it, but and obviously in many ways the Hammer version and most film versions, changed the novel a considerable amount. So I was a bit taken aback when I found the novel, and I think it's in many ways a philosophical novel, but a very fine one indeed. But certainly the concept of the monster, yeah, that was certainly kind of very much ingrained in me as I got started in the field. Now, I should explain one thing. Now, I know you're talking about fiction, literature, I mean, rather than film. But to come back to film for just a moment, the thing was that in Britain, nearly every horror movie had an X certificate. And that meant in those days, you've got to be over 15, or at least to appear, or, to be taken, or be, just nodded past the box office to get in to see it. And I'm talking about films like Plan 9 from Outer Space. That had an X, yeah.
Really?
You're astounded I see this, but yes, it's true. Yes, it's true. So the thing was, I was getting Famous Monsters of Filmland for years, the Forry Ackerman's magazine. So basically, I'd seen a lot of stuff about these movies before I could ever see the films themselves. And so, as soon as I turned, well, actually late 14, I think, I thought, I'm going to try and do this, and I did, manage to persuade the guy in the pay booth, the ticket booth, that I was 16. So I duly went in. And I think, well, Psycho was the very first, which thought with my mother, in fact, she wanted to see it. But my very first solo effort was a double bill of William Castle's Macabre, which ends by, or it actually insures you against death by fright. Well, that was William Castle's gimmick for that movie. And then with that, or the main feature actually, was by gum 3D House of Wax. So that was
nice.
One introduction to horror movie, you bet, The only thing with the castle was when you finally get to the moment where they open the coffin, I thought, did I blink? What happened? What happened? And the reason was the British censors had stepped in and snipped the image. So we didn't see what was in the coffin. Yes, that's right. It took me years to figure that out. Of course, you can see it now, but oh no, by gum, in those days, the British censor was a savage beast. Believe you me.
Man.
I mean, all sorts of films fell foul of him. I mean, Mr. Sardonicus, another William Castle movie. Yeah,
I don't know that one.
Oh, that's one of his better. It's by far his most gothic.
Okay.
But yes, I mean, the key moments in that were cut. So you got the build-up, and then basically you didn't see what it was built up to, which believe me is frustrating. So I had to wait years to see what was really behind that mask. But there you are. Glad I did.
That had to have jaded your opinion on so many movies. These storytellers have no idea what they're doing.
Well, no, to be honest, I did figure pretty early on the censors been buggering about with this, again. So usually it was insultingly obvious that something had been hacked out.
These days, frustrating.
Yeah. Now these days we have to say though they've had a change of heart, so anything pretty well gets passed. So we live in liberal times.
For sure. There's some incredible British horror that I've seen in recent years. The Ritual, I believe, was...
Oh, yes.
I think that was a British production.
It was.
Have you heard of the film Kill List?
Kill List, yes, I know it well.
Ben Wheatley, that's one of my favorite movies of the last 20 years.
It's very good, yes. I know I've seen it several times, and I think I've sorted out a little bit more each time. But I did a column for Video Watchdog for quite a number of years, and I did in fact do a column on Kill List and offered my exegesis. In fact, all those columns are now collected in a book from P.S. Publishing, along with
Oh,
the Three Stooges book. There we are. See, we've got them in there again.
there you go. as many times as we need to bring up Three Stooges, please feel free.
Fair enough.
Drop it
fair
in the
enough.
middle of a monologue. Please.
I'll do that. I'll do that. Well,
yeah,
maybe you know there's a connection between Lovecraft and the Three Stooges now,
yeah, yep.
which I didn't know, but no, there's a comic, by gum, The Three Stooges versus Cthulhu. I believe it's
that
actually,
I didn't know.
yeah, look it up online. Believe me, it's there. That's there. So
I've seen so many weird pairings of Cthulhu and other characters. There was a web comic, I believe. There's a kids TV show character called Pepper Ann, and it was Pepper Ann meets Cthulhu.
Yes,
and
yes.
I recently supported a Kickstarter for a comic. Cthulhu invades Cthulhu invades Neverland.
Okay.
So it's like, yeah, I'm excited to finally get that one. I think it's going to be interesting to see all C.S. Lewis's stuff with Lovecraft mixed in there.
I think so. Yeah.
It's an interesting concept just because of just how bizarre Neverland is and all of its inhabitants.
Yeah.
And so it's going to be interesting.
You bet.
But actually, back to Kill List. I cannot sing that one's praises enough. Which that brings me to probably my favorite British horror film of all time. The connection there is obvious. Is The Wicker Man.
Yes.
And that's just an absolute classic. And I remember seeing that one when I was a kid. My uncles were watching it, and it scared the hell out of me.
Yes.
And it's not like I watched it as an adult, and it doesn't so much scare me now. I mean, obviously, I don't have the same sensibilities as I did when I was, 10 or whatever. But like it's a completely different sort of feeling that film gave me, and it's just so. I don't know. It's hard to explain the feeling that I get from that movie, but it encompasses everything I love about horror.
Yes.
It's not, I wouldn't even call it my favorite horror movie, but I always think that The Wicker Man is like the perfect horror movie.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah. What kind of horror movies did you watch growing up? As you kind of, again, developed into the horror aficionado you are? Like, what scared you as a kid?
Oh, well, I mean, again, you see, I couldn't really see them as a kid unless they had less than an X certificate. The very first that scared me deeply, now we're talking about 3 years old here, you understand, but I could have been older and it would still do it, was the original Disney Snow White. And that deeply terrified me. Well, two things in particular, one of which was the magic mirror. Because I think it was the whole thing about looking in the mirror and not seeing your own face, which, you can do if you've dropped acid, but I didn't know that then. But, there's something deeply disturbing about this, even then for me. And the other thing, which is, I think has to tell us a lot about me and why I write what I write, if you like. There's what is supposed to be, the light relief scene when the dwarfs do a song and dance for Snow White, it's lots of fun. But the thing was this: in the background of a lot of those shots, there was a window, open on the forest. There was just blackness outside. And every time that wretched window came up, I was certain somebody was going to appear at it and peer in, And clearly I was already creating my own fiction because it never did. So that was the first thing. Two others, Lordy. One's perfectly understandable, I think. That was This Island Earth, to some extent directed by Jack Arnold, who made Tarantula and several other and Creature from the Black Lagoon. Actually, so he was quite a veteran of the. But he's not credited. He made the last reel of the film, I think. And there's a mutant in that, which is really pretty monstrous, actually, the old Metaluna mutant. For some reason, this movie got a U certificate, which meant, suitable for everybody. Well, believe me, as I cowered nearly beneath the seat in front, it seemed to me this probably wasn't suitable for everybody, certainly not for me when I was like 10 years old. So that certainly got to me. There was one other, and this persisted for a long time in my memory. It's a Danny Kaye movie. Now, well, Danny Kaye may be fighting in a different way, but that's a different issue. A movie called Knock on Wood, which is sort of an attempt to do a kind of Hitchcock comedy thriller. If you cast, say, Cary Grant or James, well, not so much James Stewart, because he's very much more neurotic for Hitchcock, but certainly Cary Grant. In the case of Danny Kaye, he's a ventriloquist. A spy, or I think a member of an espionage organisation, has secreted a microfilm in Danny Kaye's dummy, the ventriloquist dummy. And there are now two espionage operations, out to get this. So they one of them breaks into Danny Kaye's London flat while Kaye is out. The other guy gets in, while he is searching, and flings a knife which pins the guy to the back of a door, and a hat falls over his face, or I suppose the back of his head, whatever it is. So Danny Kaye comes in, the other fellow scarpers, and the joke is, how long will it take Danny Kaye to realize, no, that's not a hat and coat hanging on the back of the door? And the audience was sort of, laughing and guffawing around me. And I was in utter panic, this nightmare of this bloody corpse on the back of a door and not realizing it's there. And this did not strike me as being remotely funny. And the fact that people were laughing at it made it twice as hideous, you see. So that lodged in my mind for a long, long time. And oddly enough, I remembered it as going on far longer than it did. In fact, when I finally, rediscovered the film, it's only a kind of a quite brief gag. And it's a very kind of feeble attempt to do a Hitchcock thriller. But, even so, that stayed in my mind for such a long time that I actually wrote a version of it into a novel called The Nameless, where there's something on the back of the door, but it's not a corpse, it's something else. But I rid myself of the trauma finally that way.
I just had the image in my mind of 10-year-old Ramsey Campbell, like, why are you people laughing at this?
On the other hand, you see, the opposite has all happened to me. Because, Jenny and I we love our favourite Coen Brothers movie by far is Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? Which, and here it comes again, is clearly a Three Stooges tribute. And I'll say that for nothing, because the film The Chain Gang goes to see in the cinema, I remember that scene.
Mm-hmm.
That's actually a Three Stooges film. They don't appear in the shot in the clip. It's a movie called Mert and Marge, and it was one of the films in which they had cameo appearances, or they were secondary characters, and they don't appear in what we see. But Jack Haley, whose Stooges they were, does appear. But here's the thing about this: you see, Jenny and I, first time we saw it at the cinema in Liverpool, and we got that scene of basically, it's John Turturro, isn't it, saying, "Do not seek the treasure. We thought you was turned into a horny toad. Do not see." And we were sort of falling about laughing. And all the people in front of us were turning around staring and clearly thinking, who are these insane people? Should we get them thrown out? Which is twice as disturbing, So there you go.
So it flipped back on you years
exactly.
later.
That's right.
You were the one, yeah.
Yes, we're the monsters. The monsters are us.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, I always forget that Oh Brother, Where Art Thou was a Coen Brothers film.
Mm-hmm,
I mean, I've seen it several times, but my favorite Coen Brothers is No Country for Old Men.
Oh, it's very fun, yes. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Anton Chigurh is one of the most terrifying antagonists outside of a horror film.
Very much so.
I've ever seen.
Mind you, he comes out of Cormac McCarthy, so what do you expect?
Exactly. Yeah, I'm sure you've read Blood Meridian.
Yes, oh Lord, yes.
Yeah. I would love to see the Coen Brothers take on that.
Yes, well, of course, there've been attempts, haven't there? Apparently, they've got shelved because it was going to be so bloody that nobody would go anywhere near it. But there's a rumour that it's not Billy Bob Thornton, is it? Somebody's looking to do it at the moment, I do believe. So maybe this time, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, hopefully there's I think from what I gather, there's kind of always rumors of like, oh, this person is attached or this person is showing interest in it. And I mean, as I'm sure nothing is really happening until it's happening.
Well, so certainly not in film, it's not, that's for sure.
Right. Yeah, that's what I mean. Yeah. So it's hard to say, but yeah, no, I'd love to see it because McCarthy had just an incredible way of writing
Mm.
villains that weren't like, I don't know, like the Judge to me,
Yes.
and many others. It's not like I'm unique in this thought, but
Yeah.
that is quite possibly the most terrifying villain ever
Oh
created.
yeah, no,
I
I'm
mean,
I'm with you there. Yes, by
y-
certain. Mind
yeah,
you,
and
mind you, did you ever see The Counselor, the Ridley Scott movie?
yes, yep,
Well, I mean, Cameron bloody Diaz is pretty terrifying in that.
for sure.
Yeah, which is
Yes,
a real
absolutely.
surprise. Yeah.
Yeah, that one. Yeah, that I didn't know when I saw that. I didn't know that was based on a McCarthy novel.
I know I
Um,
think it's an original script he wrote, isn't it?
oh, is it? Oh, okay.
I
No, yeah,
think
I think you're
so.
right. I
Mm.
think you're right. And I was just about to say, and I haven't read the novel. That's
Hmm.
probably why.
Yes, yes.
Uh,
Too late now
um,
because he won't write it. But there you
yeah,
are.
right. Unfortunately, may he
Mm.
rest in peace.
Yeah, yeah.
But yeah, no. He has a way with, like, with the Judge and with Shigur, and
Mm.
they are so kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? They're not like outwardly, like if you walked by them and they
Mm.
didn't turn their attention on you,
Mm.
you would
Yes.
never know that they were these heinous, just
Yeah.
awful individuals. And I,
Sure.
I love that. They're unassuming.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
probably the word I was looking for, unassuming.
But I
And
think
yeah,
there is a sort of sense of the uncanny to them as well, I think,
mm-hmm.
particularly the Judge.
For sure, the Judge, and even Shigur, he's
Yes.
presented as this sort of unstoppable force of nature,
Mm, that's right.
and I think they may actually even describe him as such in the
Mm-hmm.
film. But yeah,
Mm-hmm.
the Judge, especially. I mean, there's so much potentially supernatural going on in Blood Meridian,
Yes,
and just
yes.
kind of lurking there in the background. And yeah, the Judge, in particular, is just this like. I mean, I don't want to root. It's a however many decades old
Hmm.
book, but
Yeah.
like he's so. I mean, they describe him as being like 7 feet tall, but yet
Mm,
he moves as swiftly as a gazelle, and
mm,
just yeah,
mm-hmm.
he's all these weird, this like contradictions of size
Yeah,
and speed, and just
yeah.
yeah, and it really comes through in the writing,
Oh, very
and
much so, yes, yes.
uh, I gotta admit, it is so difficult for me to get through Cormac McCarthy books. Like
Uh-huh.
like just because I love them, I
Mm,
very much, but it's just the writing style. I've never, I personally could never write like that. I don't get like
right.
the lack of punctuation and quotes, and obviously you fall into it
Yeah, you get
as
used
you
to
go
it.
along.
Yeah,
Yeah, but
yeah.
it's I have a hard enough time keeping my mind focused on a traditionally written book. So when
Right,
it comes to
right.
McCarthy, it takes me a while.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. You bet.
Are there any authors currently that you're reading, or like what's on your book? What's on your nightstand now that you're reading, if anything?
Oh Lord. I'm going to have to look this up because yeah, dependent on the mobile phone here. I'm just going to check what the guy's name is because I have right now. I'm reading a novel which has not yet been published.
Mm.
And I mean, well, people send a lot of these things to me. You know what I mean?
Mm.
Um, and it is a novel by, and I'm going to tell you in a minute. At least I hope I am, because this interminably prolonged interlude. Otherwise, it's going to frustrate everybody very deeply, isn't it? There we are. What's this guy's name? Yeah, Gareth Wood. Gareth Wood. You've not heard of him, but I think you may in the future.
Oh, nice.
I mean, it's. I think it's an unedited for it's not been through editing yet, but there's a real sort of raw power to it that I found very impressive. So it was just sent to me by one of my editors, and yeah, this is it's impressive. I also just read the new novel by Daniel Church, who is
Mm-hmm.
a friend and and also fellow English horror writer, called The Ravening, which is very powerful stuff. I mean, both just sort of sheerly compelling narrative, and also sort of monsters that are all too human, but also one monster that spectacularly isn't, and, verges on the cosmic. So this is stuff I like, and I'm very pleased with that. I've just done a quote for that. Um,
Nice.
And there's all. I mean, also, in my spare moments between reading stuff that people have sent me, I dip back into Kingsley Amis and Robert Aikman and the like. But I'm more and more aware there's not enough time.
Not
Um,
enough hours in the day.
no, that's right. Oh, now the other thing I read very recently was Graham Greene's first novel, which is very strange. I remember reading it. Oh, when I started working in the public libraries back in the late '60s, and I thought, Graham Greene was was and is one of my absolute favourite writers, and this was his first published novel, and I was very taken aback because it was a sort of historical adventure involving smugglers and the excise men. I thought, well, this isn't like Green at all. And I picked it up again very recently and thought, well, I'll give it another shot. What's interesting? Yes, it's very much like Green, except the setting, which he would always, other than that, he was a contemporary setting, but it's all the green is all there. I mean, an early scene with a clergyman doing a funeral while he's got a terrible cold. It's pure Graham Greene, but it reads like a first unedited draft of Graham Greene, and he will later refine all this, to distill it. And it's a weird thing because this is what I've tried to do over the decades with my own stuff. So kind of feel it's worth doing.
Yeah, for sure. And then just one last question: what can we expect from you next? Are you working on? Do you have any novels? I mean, I'm sure you can't really say much about anything.
Yes, all the time. You better believe it. Well, I mean, this is the 60th anniversary of that first published book, The Inhabitant of the Lake. So, PSP Publishing are going to do a special limited signed illustrated edition, very limited hardcover. Awesome. And then Flame Tree Press, by splendid mass market publishers, they've got my new novel for November, a book called The Incubations, which is about twin towns and what comes back from one of them, brought by a visitor to the other one, which I'm sure you'll appreciate will be uncanny and very terrible. So they're going to do a limited edition of that, together with a Lovecraft collection and an M.R. James collection that I've done special introductions to. It's going to be a sort of uniform trilogy, well, not quite a trilogy, but a uniform triad, if you like. And I've just got through the dispiriting process of rereading the first draft of next year's novel, a book called An Echo of Children. And at this point, all I can see is all that's wrong with it. And by God, there's a lot. But, these days, at least I can tell myself, well, that's what rewriting is for. You see the problem, you're on the way to fixing it. And the rewrite starts tomorrow, at which point I become ruthless and merciless with the whole thing. And as I didn't used to be enough, but these days I am. So watch out, first draft. I'm coming for you.
I love it. All right. Well, thank you very much, Mr. Campbell. I really appreciate you coming on here and talking to me.
My pleasure, man. My pleasure. And don't forget my book. I know it's out now, so it's not quite a new thing, but Three Stooges and Counting is my study of the Three Stooges.
All right, Three Stooges. Where can people find that? Where, if people want more Ramsey Campbell, where can they go?
Oh, well, Amazon have got it, Barnes and Noble have got it, anywhere like that, and the publisher's PS as well. And not least, it includes the episode of Room 237, which you may know is the documentary film about what The Shining, the Kubrick film, was really about. Well, my 2-page contribution is that the entire film is a tribute to the Three Stooges. And I adduce a great deal of evidence, but you must read it for yourselves.
All right. I will have a link down to that book in the show notes and the description of this video. All right. Thank you again, Mr. Campbell. You have a good day, sir.
You too, man. You too.